My name is Alara Vance, and I'm here today to tell you about the time my boss fired me over Zoom. You might think that's bad enough. A cold, impersonal end to years of hard work. But that wasn't even the worst of it. The real kicker? He did it because he was trying to impress someone else, someone he thought was more important than me, someone who owned the very company I ended up buying just months later. It's a story about being overlooked, underestimated, and finding out that sometimes the greatest betrayal is the spark you need to finally see your own power. Stay with me, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear if any part of my journey resonates with you. For years, I existed in the periphery of my own life. I was the reliable one, the quiet achiever, the woman who made things happen behind the scenes. At work, this translated into long hours, thankless tasks, and a constant readiness to pick up the slack. My boss, Mark, was a man defined by bluster and ambition. He was all flash and minimal substance, the kind of person who excelled at taking credit and delegating responsibility until the point of collapse, at which moment he'd swoop in, fix the last 10%, and declare himself a hero. I was his indispensable shadow, the one who ensured the ship stayed afloat while he hobnobbed and strategized in rooms I was rarely invited into. Our company, a mid-sized firm in the tech sector, was under pressure. The market was shifting, and Mark was desperate to make a splash, to prove his worth to the higher-ups who he constantly felt were judging his every move. His current obsession was acquiring a small, innovative startup called Viridian Dynamics. Viridian had developed a groundbreaking AI platform that promised to disrupt our industry, and Mark saw it as his golden ticket. He talked about it incessantly, sketching out integration plans on whiteboards, hosting endless meetings that went nowhere, and generally creating an atmosphere of frantic, unfocused energy. My role in this grand plan, unbeknownst to Mark, was foundational. While he was busy schmoozing the Viridian founders and presenting inflated projections, I was the one doing the deep dive. I analyzed Viridian's technology, understood its true potential and its limitations, modeled integration strategies that were actually feasible, and identified the real risks and rewards. I stayed late poring over their code documentation, consulted with our technical teams, and synthesized complex information into digestible reports that Mark would then glance at, initial, and present, as his own. I built the financial models that showed the acquisition was viable, identified key personnel at Viridian we'd need to retain, and even drafted parts of the initial proposal language. I didn't resent the work itself. I was good at it. I found satisfaction in the complexity, in seeing how all the pieces fit together. What stung, though, was the invisibility. Mark never mentioned my name in these acquisition meetings. He referred to the team's analysis, or our findings, but it was my analysis, my findings. I told myself it didn't matter, that the work was its own reward, that my value would eventually be recognized. This was a pattern in my life, a quiet acceptance of being the supporting character, conditioned by years of being the easy child, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who didn't ask for much, who just quietly handled things while others demanded attention and resources. My family, while not malicious, had a way of celebrating overt achievements while overlooking quiet competence. It taught me that being seen required being loud, and I had never learned to raise my voice. So I continued to work tirelessly on the Viridian project. I was perhaps more invested than Mark was, not in the glory, but in the potential of Viridian's technology. I genuinely believed it could transform our company, making it more efficient, more innovative. I saw the engineers at Viridian as kindred spirits, focused, brilliant people building something real. I even had a few low-level email exchanges with some of their technical leads, asking clarifying questions about their architecture, and I was impressed by their responses, their passion. One Tuesday morning, I received a calendar invite from Mark for a Zoom meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. The subject line was simply, check-in. No agenda, nothing unusual. My calendar was packed, but I reshuffled a few things, assuming it was about the Viridian project or one of the other dozen plates I kept spinning. At precisely 10 a.m., I clicked the link. Mark was already there, sitting in his plush office chair, the company logo visible behind him. His face was impassive, which was unusual for him. He usually wore an expression of performative urgency. There was someone else on the call, a woman I didn't recognize. She had the crisp, polished look of someone from HR, or maybe legal. My stomach tightened slightly. This didn't feel like a regular check-in. Mark didn't waste time. No small talk. No preamble about the weather or the market. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze unsettlingly flat. "Ilara," he said, his voice devoid of its usual booming quality. "Thanks for jumping on this call." I managed a faint smile. "Of course, Mark. What's up?" "So," he continued, ignoring my question, "we've been evaluating the structure of the team as we prepare for some strategic shifts, particularly around the Viridian acquisition." My ears perked up. Strategic shifts? Was I getting a promotion? More responsibility on the Viridian integration? As part of that evaluation, he went on, we've had to make some difficult decisions about aligning resources with our future needs. Unfortunately, your role is one that we've determined is no longer required moving forward. The words hung in the air, absurd and disconnected from reality. No longer required? I was working 15-hour days, keeping his entire operation running. I was the backbone of the very acquisition he was talking about. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the syllables he had just uttered. I don't understand, Mark. My role? But I'm handling. "We appreciate your contributions, Ilara." The woman from HR interjected smoothly, her voice calm and practiced, cutting off my bewildered protest. "We've prepared a severance package, and the details will be emailed to you shortly by HR. Your access to company systems has already been revoked." Already revoked. While I was sitting here, logged in, ready to work, they had locked me out. It was a clinical, calculated move, designed to prevent any last-minute access, any possibility of me downloading files or sending emails. It was efficient. It was dehumanizing. "Effective immediately," Mark added, his voice gaining a touch of its usual authority, as if he was recovering his composure now that the difficult part was over. "Your final paycheck, along with the severance details, will be sent to you." I felt my face grow hot, then cold. My hands started to tremble. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything. Not now. "But, the Viridian project," I stammered, clinging to the one thing that felt real. "I was working on the integration plan. I have the analysis." Mark actually chuckled, a short, dismissive sound. "Don't worry about Viridian, Ilara. We have it under control. We've brought in external consultants who are better equipped to handle the complexities of the final stages. They have the strategic vision needed for this kind of high-level deal-making." He puffed out his chest slightly, clearly including himself in this category of strategically visioned individuals. External consultants. They were replacing my detailed hands-on work with high-priced outsiders who would likely just slap together a generic framework. And the actual reason he was doing this, became sickeningly clear in that moment. He wasn't getting rid of me because my role wasn't needed. He was getting rid of me because he thought I wasn't the right image for the final stages of a big deal. He wanted to look like he was surrounded by high-powered, expensive consultants, not the quiet, competent woman who actually did the work. He was trying to impress the Viridian founders, maybe even his own bosses, by signaling that he was operating at a level beyond needing someone like me in the weeds. He was sacrificing my livelihood, my years of loyalty and effort for appearances, for his ego. The HR woman spoke again, guiding the termination to its swift conclusion. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors, Ilara. HR will follow up." Mark nodded, a final, curt dismissal. "Goodbye, Ilara." And then, they were gone. The Zoom call ended. The screen went black. I sat there in silence, the cursor blinking on my blank desktop. My access was gone. My email, my files, my calendar, all locked away. Years of work, erased. My identity, so tied to being the reliable, capable professional, felt like it had been ripped away. The tears came then, hot and heavy, blurring my vision. It wasn't just the shock of being fired, or the sudden uncertainty of unemployment, it was the profound sense of betrayal. Betrayal by Mark, who I had trusted enough to give my all to. Betrayal by a system that valued presentation over performance, ego over effort. It felt like a culmination of every time I had been overlooked, every time someone else had taken credit, every time I had told myself to be patient, that my turn would come. I stumbled away from my desk, the silence of my apartment pressing in. I walked into the living room, sinking onto the sofa, wrapping my arms around myself. The trembling hadn't stopped. It felt like my entire body was vibrating with shock and suppressed rage. The casual cruelty of it, the absolute lack of regard for me as a person, cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a job, it was the structure of my days, the source of my income, a major part of how I defined myself. I thought about all the late nights, the weekends I'd worked, the times I'd solved problems Mark didn't even know existed. I remembered him saying things like, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Alara," or, "You're the only one who really gets this." Lies. All lies, or at least, conditional truths, that evaporated the moment his convenience dictated otherwise. The next few days were a blur of grief and confusion. I called my best friend, Sarah, and through choked sobs, explained what had happened. She was sympathetic, outraged on my behalf, but her reassurances felt distant. "You're so talented, Alara, you'll find something better," she said. And I knew she meant it, but in that moment I didn't feel talented. I felt disposable. My mother's reaction was typical. "Oh, Alara, I'm so sorry. What a terrible shock. But you always worked so hard, maybe too hard? You need to take better care of yourself." And really, Mark always seemed a bit flashy, didn't he? Did you ever tell him everything you were doing? "You're always so quiet about your achievements." Even in my moment of pain, there was the subtle implication that perhaps I was somehow responsible, that my quiet nature had led to my downfall. It was the same subtle pressure I'd felt my whole life. Be successful, but don't be too visible. Be competent, but don't outshine others. Work hard, but don't complain when it goes unnoticed. It was a tightrope I had walked for so long, and I had just fallen off. I received the HR email with the severance details. It was minimal, bare bones, just enough to cover a few months of expenses if I was frugal. It reinforced the message: my value to them was negligible. They were paying me just enough to avoid a lawsuit, nothing more. There was no recognition of my contributions, no acknowledgement of the Viridian work. It was cold, corporate language designed to close a chapter cleanly for them. I retreated into myself. I stopped answering calls, ignored texts. The world outside felt alien and threatening. I would wake up, stare at the ceiling, and feel a crushing weight of failure and despair. The injustice of it all gnawed at me. Mark was probably already parading his expensive consultants around, basking in the illusion of competence, while I was here, broken and invisible. I started to question everything. Was I really not good enough? Was Mark right? Did I lack strategic vision? Was my quiet competence truly worthless in the face of loud mediocrity? My self-doubt, long a quiet hum in the background, escalated into a roaring storm. I replayed every interaction, every time I hadn't spoken up, every time I had let an unfair task fall to me, every time I had accepted an inadequate explanation. I saw a pattern of enabling my own exploitation, not just at work, but perhaps in other areas of my life too. The thought of Mark, sitting in his office, moving forward with the Viridian acquisition using the foundation I had built, while I was discarded, was a constant, burning ember in my gut. It wasn't just the money, or the job title. It was the indignity, the profound disrespect for my abilities and my dedication. He hadn't just fired me, he had invalidated me. One particularly bleak afternoon, curled up on the sofa, Scrolling aimlessly through my phone, I stumbled upon an article about Viridian Dynamics. It wasn't about the acquisition, but about a minor technical challenge they were facing, a bug in their system that was causing some performance issues. I paused. I remembered seeing notes about this during my deep dive into their documentation. I even had some ideas about potential solutions based on my understanding of their platform's architecture and our own company's systems. My mind, for the first time in days, shifted from self-pity to problem-solving. It was a familiar, comfortable place. I started thinking about their system, about the bug, about the elegant ways it could be fixed. It was like a switch flipped. I wasn't just Alara, the fired employee, the victim. I was Alara, the analyst, the problem solver, the one who understood complex systems. Then, another thought surfaced, cold and sharp. Mark didn't understand Viridian's technology the way I did. He didn't understand the nuances, the challenges, the true potential. He saw it as a trophy, a stepping stone. The external consultants he hired likely had broad strategic experience, but did they have the detailed technical understanding required to truly value Viridian, to integrate it successfully, to navigate its specific issues? Probably not. I had that understanding. The injustice flared anew, but this time, it was tempered with a flicker of something else. Clarity. Mark thought he was being strategic by replacing me with expensive window dressing. But in doing so, he had removed the person who held the most crucial, granular knowledge about the target company. He had weakened his own position, perhaps without even realizing it. What if, I thought, a crazy, impossible thought blooming in the desolate landscape of my despair, what if there was another way? What if the Viridian founders weren't entirely happy with Mark's company? Acquisitions could be tricky. Cultural clashes, disagreements over valuation, concerns about integration, any number of things could derail a deal. What if Mark, in his arrogance and focus on appearance, was missing something, or even alienating the Viridian team? A dangerous idea began to form. I had access to the information Mark didn't think was important, the deep technical analysis, the realistic integration plans, the true valuation based on functionality, not just hype. I also had something Mark didn't, a genuine respect for Viridian's technology and its team. I sat up straighter. My heart started to beat faster, not from panic this time, but from a strange, unfamiliar surge of adrenaline. What if I didn't just get a new job? What if I leveraged my unique understanding of Viridian, my knowledge of the acquisition process, and the massive chip on my shoulder to do something completely unexpected? Could I somehow get involved with Viridian myself? Not as an employee of Mark's competitor, but independently? The idea seemed ludicrous. I was unemployed, nursing a bruised ego, and feeling fundamentally broken. What did I have to offer a startup that Mark's established company wanted to buy? Then I remembered something else. My grandmother. She had been a shrewd businesswoman, owning a small but successful chain of bakeries. When she passed away a few years ago, she had left me a substantial inheritance. She had always told me, "Don't touch this money, Alara, unless it's for something truly significant, an opportunity that could change your life." At the time, I hadn't really understood what that meant. Now, sitting there, the idea of Viridian taking root in my mind, I felt a jolt of understanding. This felt significant. I pulled up my banking app. The inheritance was still there, untouched, sitting in a conservative investment account. It was a considerable sum, enough perhaps to make a bold move. A new emotion began to stir alongside the anger and the nascent determination. Fear. This was way outside my comfort zone. I was the quiet achiever, remember? The one who followed instructions, who supported others' visions, not the one who forged her own path, especially not one that involved directly challenging someone who had hurt her. The thought of contacting the Viridian founders, of presenting myself as a potential investor or partner, felt terrifying. But the alternative, job hunting, going back into the workforce to potentially face another Mark, another situation where my contributions were invisible, felt even worse. The memory of that black Zoom screen, of Mark's dismissive chuckle, fueled a simmering defiance. I wouldn't be disposable, not anymore. I spent the next few days in a feverish state, alternating between intense research and crippling self-doubt. I used my personal network, the few contacts I had cultivated outside of Mark's direct supervision, to gather more intelligence on Viridian. I read everything I could find about their founders, their investors, their challenges. It became clear they were brilliant technologists, but lacked significant business development and strategic leadership experience. They were facing pressure from early investors for a return, and the acquisition by a larger company seemed like their most likely exit. I also researched the acquisition process from the other side, the buyer's side, but from the perspective of someone with deep knowledge of the target. I realized my detailed technical analysis and realistic integration plans were incredibly valuable. Mark's external consultants were likely working with high-level summaries, lacking the nuanced understanding I possessed. My involuntary deep dive had given me a unique advantage. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the determination was growing stronger. This wasn't just about revenge, though a part of me relished the thought of Mark's face if he ever found out. It was about reclaiming my worth, about proving to myself that my abilities were not just valuable when used in service of someone else's ambition, but inherently valuable. It was about taking control after feeling utterly powerless. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed expertise I didn't have, particularly in legal and financial negotiations for an acquisition. I needed someone who understood the complexities of deals, someone who could protect my interests. I reached out to a lawyer I knew through a mutual acquaintance, someone specializing in corporate law and M&A. Her name was Anya Sharma, and she had a reputation for being sharp, strategic, and fiercely protective of her clients. Meeting Anya was another step outside my comfort zone. I felt exposed, vulnerable, explaining my bizarre situation, fired by my boss, who was trying to buy a company I now wanted to somehow acquire myself, using the knowledge I gained while working for him. I laid out everything: my history at the company, the Viridian analysis I had done, the severance package, my grandmother's inheritance, and the crazy idea that had taken root. Anya listened patiently, her expression unreadable at first. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Ilara," she said, her voice low and thoughtful. "This is audacious. I like it." That simple phrase, "I like it," was a balm to my frayed nerves. It validated the idea, made it feel slightly less insane. "Tell me more about this analysis you did," she prompted. "How detailed is it? Do you have it? Is it technically company property?" I explained that my detailed analysis was in my head and in notes I had taken on my personal laptop, using publicly available documents and my own technical expertise. The reports I generated for Mark were on company systems, but the foundational understanding and the truly insightful parts were my own intellectual property, developed using my skills, not proprietary company data. Anya confirmed that this was a crucial distinction. My knowledge was mine. We began to strategize. Anya's mind worked like a steel trap. She outlined the steps, discreetly approaching the Viridian founders, presenting a compelling alternative to Mark's company, structuring a potential offer, navigating due diligence, and, crucially, handling the potential legal ramifications if Mark's company discovered what I was doing. Discretion is key, Anya stressed. If Mark or his company gets wind of your interest, they could try to block you, either by accelerating their offer, or worse, by claiming you're using confidential information, even if it's not strictly true. We need to move quickly and quietly. Approaching the Viridian founders was the most daunting step. Anya advised writing a brief, compelling letter expressing my admiration for their technology and requesting a confidential meeting to discuss a potential partnership or investment opportunity. She helped me craft the language, professional, respectful, highlighting my unique understanding of their platform and the market, without revealing my past employment or my specific acquisition intent just yet. Sending that email felt like stepping off a cliff. I was exposing myself, putting my crazy idea out there for judgment, potentially facing rejection from the very people whose work had inspired me. I hit send, and then paced my apartment, the silence broken only by the frantic beating of my own heart. Hours later, I received a reply. It was from Ethan, one of Viridian's co-founders. To my astonishment and relief, it was positive. He was intrigued by my understanding of their technology, noting that few potential partners truly grasped its intricacies. He agreed to a confidential video call. Preparation for that call was intense. Anya coached me on how to present myself, how to convey confidence and vision without appearing arrogant. I practiced explaining my deep dive analysis, articulating my vision for Viridian's future, and subtly highlighting the potential drawbacks of being acquired by a large traditional company like Marks, without explicitly badmouthing them. The call with Ethan and his co-founder, Liam, lasted for 2 hours. I spoke with a clarity and passion I hadn't realized I possessed. I wasn't just reciting facts. I was sharing my genuine belief in their technology, my understanding of the market gaps it could fill, and my ideas for scaling their business. I showed them the integration plans I had developed, explaining how they were more realistic and effective than the high-level strategies Mark was likely presenting. I talked about company culture, about the importance of retaining their innovative spirit, something I suspected Mark's company would stifle. Ethan and Liam were receptive, engaged. They admitted they were feeling pressure from investors, but were also wary of losing control and seeing their technology diluted or mishandled by a larger entity. They appreciated my detailed understanding and my respect for their work. They saw that I wasn't just a potential buyer, I was someone who understood their vision. At the end of the call, I took a deep breath and made my proposal. I didn't frame it as a hostile takeover or a direct challenge to Mark. I framed it as an alternative, a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared vision. I proposed acquiring a controlling stake in Viridian Dynamics, allowing them to retain significant roles and creative control, while providing the financial stability and business expertise they needed to scale. I mentioned I had access to significant personal capital and had a strong legal team ready to move quickly and efficiently. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, Ethan spoke. Alara, that's not what we expected. Liam nodded. We assumed you were representing an investment firm, or maybe a competitor we hadn't identified. I'm representing myself, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I believe in what you've built. I believe I can help you achieve its full potential in a way that respects your vision and your team. They agreed to consider my proposal and to enter into confidential discussions. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal work, financial assessments, and intensive negotiations. Anya was invaluable, guiding me through every step, protecting me from unfavorable terms, and ensuring the deal was structured to empower me as the new owner while incentivizing Ethan and Liam to stay on and thrive. During this time, I heard whispers through my network that Mark's acquisition of Viridian was hitting snags. There were disagreements over valuation, delays in due diligence, and some personality clashes between Mark and the Viridian founders. It seemed my intuition had been correct. Mark's approach was likely too heavy-handed, too focused on the deal as a transaction rather than a collaboration. His lack of genuine understanding of Viridian's core value was likely showing through. My offer, presented as a respectful partnership by someone who genuinely understood their technology, proved increasingly attractive to Ethan and Liam. My ability to move quickly, unburdened by corporate bureaucracy, also gave me an advantage. While Mark's company was tied up in internal approvals and lengthy processes, Anya and I were streamlining, negotiating directly, and building trust with the founders. Funding the acquisition was a major step. My grandmother's inheritance formed the foundation, but it wasn't quite enough for a controlling stake at the valuation we agreed upon, which was higher than Mark's initial offer because I saw and valued Viridian's true potential. I had to secure a loan, leveraging the projected value of Viridian under my leadership. It was a calculated risk, a massive financial commitment that Anya helped me structure responsibly. Signing those loan documents was terrifying and exhilarating. I was betting everything on myself, on my vision, on the value I knew I could bring. It felt worlds away from the woman who had quietly worked in the shadows. Finally, after weeks of intense work, sleepless nights, and moments of near paralysis from fear, the deal was ready. The acquisition agreement was signed. Viridian Dynamics, the innovative startup Mark had been desperate to acquire, was now majority owned by me. The news broke quietly at first, a small article in a tech industry publication announcing the acquisition of Viridian Dynamics by an independent investment group, mentioning me as the principal. I waited. I knew it would reach Mark eventually. It happened a few days later. I received an email from a former colleague, someone I had kept in touch with. The subject line was simply, OMG Alara, followed by a link to the news article. The email itself was a flurry of exclamation points and shocked emojis. Is this real? It read. Everyone here is losing their minds. Mark is raging. A cold, satisfying wave washed over me. Raging. Good. Later that day, my phone rang. It was a number I recognized, Mark's direct line at the office. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding. Then, I answered. Hello? I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. Alara, what the hell is this? Mark's voice boomed down the line, not his usual confident bluster, but tinged with panic and disbelief. Hello, Mark, I replied. What are you referring to? Viridian. The article. It says you bought it. His voice was rising, incredulous. How? Why? We were acquiring Viridian. I was acquiring Viridian. Yes, I saw the article, I said, leaning back in my chair, a sense of calm empowerment settling over me. This was it, the confrontation. And for the first time, I didn't feel small or invisible. I felt powerful. Viridian Dynamics is now a privately held company. I am the majority owner. But that's impossible. You were working for me. You knew about the deal. You used confidential information. He sputtered, his panic morphing into accusation. I used my own knowledge, Mark. I corrected him calmly. Knowledge I gained through my own work based on publicly available information and my technical expertise. You yourself said my role was no longer required for the strategic part of the acquisition. Remember? You said you had it under control. There was silence on his end, a stunned, sputtering silence. He hadn't expected this. He had dismissed me, fired me over Zoom, believing I would simply disappear, another forgotten casualty of his ambition. He had never for a moment considered that I would not only survive but thrive, and directly challenge him using the very opportunity he thought was his. You can't do this, he finally managed, his voice tight with rage. This is unethical. It's practically theft. It's business, Mark, I said, my voice still quiet but firm. Anya, my lawyer, assures me everything is perfectly legal. You terminated my employment. I was free to pursue other opportunities. You were slow. Your offer didn't truly value the company, and apparently, your approach wasn't as compelling as you thought. I simply presented a better offer and a stronger vision to the founders. They chose to accept it. I let that sink in for a moment. They chose me. The brilliant founders of Viridian, the company he was so desperate to impress, had chosen me over him and his corporate machine. The consultants you hired, I continued, pressing my advantage slightly. Did they really understand Viridian the way I did? Or were they just expensive window dressing? He didn't answer. There was a choked sound on the other end, like he was physically struggling to process the reversal of fortune. I understand this is disappointing for you, Mark, I said, and I meant it in the coldest, most detached way possible. I wasn't gloating openly, but the quiet satisfaction was immense. But Viridian is in good hands. We have exciting plans for the future. He hung up. I stood there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, then the silence. My hand was no longer trembling. A profound sense of calm washed over me, replacing the years of quiet anxiety and the recent storm of despair. It wasn't just about buying the company, it was about buying myself back, reclaiming my power, my worth, my voice. The aftermath wasn't a simple happily ever after. Running Viridian Dynamics was challenging. It required long hours, difficult decisions, and navigating the complexities of leadership. But it was my challenge, my vision. Ethan and Liam were fantastic partners, their technical brilliance complementing my strategic and business acumen. We worked together, respected each other's strengths, and built a culture based on collaboration and genuine value. Taking control wasn't just about the business, it was about my life. I started setting boundaries, something I had always struggled with. I learned to say no, to prioritize my own well-being, to trust my instincts. The quiet people pleaser was still a part of me, the one who valued harmony and support, but she was no longer the dominant force. She was balanced by a newfound strength, a fierce protectiveness of my own energy and worth. My relationships shifted. Some people, like Sarah, were thrilled and supportive. Others, like my mother, struggled to adjust to the more assertive, less easily managed version of me. I was no longer the quiet, dependable daughter who took whatever came her way. I had dared to be audacious, to be loud in my own way, and it unsettled those who were used to the old dynamic. I learned that true support meant accepting this new version of myself, and that some relationships might need to change to accommodate it. Mark faced consequences at his company. Failing to secure the key acquisition he had promised, coupled with the embarrassment of losing it to his former, unceremoniously fired employee, did not reflect well on his strategic vision. I didn't track his downfall obsessively, but I heard whispers. His bluster, it turned out, couldn't compensate for his lack of substance and his fundamental misjudgment of people. Running Viridian was the hardest, most rewarding thing I had ever done. Every challenge I faced, every success we achieved, felt like a victory not just for the company, but for the woman who had been told she was no longer required. I built a company culture where every contribution was seen and valued, a stark contrast to the environment I had left. I made sure the engineers, the quiet innovators like Ethan and Liam, were celebrated and empowered. Looking back, being fired over Zoom wasn't the end, it was the necessary catalyst. The betrayal, as painful as it was, shattered the illusion that my worth was tied to external validation or dependent on someone else's approval. It forced me to look inward, to confront my own patterns of people-pleasing and self-effacement, and to realize that I had the power all along. I learned that being quiet isn't the same as being weak, but silence in the face of injustice is a form of self-betrayal. I found my voice, not by becoming loud and boastful like Mark, but by becoming clear, confident, and unapologetically myself. I stopped waiting to be seen and started standing in my own light. The woman who was fired over Zoom, broken and invisible, transformed into the woman who bought the company, empowered and in control. And that, more than any business success, was the greatest acquisition of all. So, that's my story. It's messy, it's painful, and it's ultimately about finding strength in the most unexpected places, even after being dismissed in the coldest way possible. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or betrayed, know that your story doesn't end there. Your value isn't determined by someone else's limited vision. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is the one no one sees coming. Remember to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of overcoming challenges, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your journey is valid, and you are stronger than you know. Thanks for listening.